So, well, good evening. Thank you very much for coming. My name is Mark Jarnik. I'm the current president for the Land Trust, and I appreciate you guys coming. And because of my role, I get to introduce the tonight's activities. I wanted to just share a few things with you before we jump into it. We have two events coming up in June that I wanted to just make sure everybody's aware of. One is for Connecticut Trails Day, which is Saturday, June 1st. We're sponsoring a hike that's going to go down into MDC property down to the hollow around the lake, which should be a blast. And I'm told that, and there'll be, you can find on the website and in our newsletter also that's coming out soon. But we're going to meet at 9 o'clock at the corner of Walnut Hill and Pine Street in East Hartland, and then hike down to the reservoir and work around the water's edge and then come back out. But the MDC, we got permission from them, and it'd be nice to be able to go down there and see the hollow. The other thing is the following Friday, June 7th, is our annual forum, and that'll be held here. And Audubon Sharon is going to be coming and talking about raptors with us, and they're going to bring at least one live owl and one hawk, and talk about differences anatomically between them and their habits and so forth. And so that should be a lot of fun. So if you can make that or pass the word around, that would be great. Just a couple other things, more land trust business kind of things. But we're putting together our annual newsletter that we send out to everybody in town and assorted other friends and all the property owners in town as well, if they happen to be out of town. And that'll include our annual membership charter. So for those of you who are members, thank you very much. And we'd encourage anybody else who appreciates what we're doing with speakers and things like that here to please consider joining or renewing your membership. One thing that we have on the seats around here, and there's also another little stack of papers there, but Amazon Smile. I don't know if you are familiar with it, but those who do purchase things through Amazon.com, they have a capability called Amazon Smile. There's some information on this where you can designate a nonprofit of some sort that you'd like them to support. And if you end up doing your purchases through their Amazon Smile link, which looks just like a regular Amazon effort when you go to it, they donate a percentage of any purchases made through there to the charity that you specify. Hartland Land Trust is one of the ones that are available to specify in there, but other ones, I'm sure Historical Society and other things could benefit from it as well. So if you're not taking advantage of it, it doesn't cost you anything, and it's a nice way to support organizations that you support. Just the last thing, or next to last thing, Carol over there, Carol Vincent, has a table there. We still have some Land Trust calendars left. We're a little bit into the year. You can get them for half price for $8 if you'd like one. And they have great photographs from wildlife throughout the town taken by town photographers. And there's also gift cards or little thank you notes in there, also with wildlife and nature photos from town, again taken by Hartland photographers. And there's great little Land Trust caps, baseball type caps with the Land Trust logo on them for $20 if you'd like one of those. So last thing I just wanted to say is out in the hallway there's assorted foodstuffs in there, some baked goods and snacks and things like that. So afterward, if you want to socialize and have something to snack on before you head home, feel free to linger. We'd be happy to have you. So, to introduce tonight's speakers. This is Timothy Batchelor, and Timothy comes to us from Middlebury, Connecticut, and he's the fire control officer for Western Connecticut with the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection here. And he's been in fire service for 35 years with experience throughout the country. And he'll explain more about his history and involvement with that during the course of his presentation. And joining him tonight is Jerry Milne, who is a state forester based at the Pleasant Valley office, field office down there in Pleasant Valley here. on West River Road. And Jerry is going to explain more about his involvement there. But we really appreciate you two coming to take the time to talk to us, and thank you very much.
Okay, like Mark said, my name is Tim Batchelor. I'm the fire control officer for Western Connecticut. So everything west of the river through, that's for the state forestry, DEP, state forestry. Maybe many of you didn't know that the state does have an active forest fire program. Is anybody here that didn't know that? Okay, wow. It's been, and we'll start talking about the history of the forestry program in Connecticut, and that's why I brought Jerry. Jerry's worked for the state for many years and has some great intel for you on past history. I just started here with the state of Connecticut in May, so I don't know a lot of Connecticut history. I'm originally from Massachusetts. I grew up in central to western Massachusetts in the town of North Brookfield, Mass. Grew up on a farm. Through things happening, I ended up, well, we're going to get into that in my little bit bio, but grew up there on the farm, owned a tree and land clearing business. We'll talk a little bit more of that in a few minutes. Also was involved, that's when I got involved with fire, my local fire department. So let's take a quick peek here at the first slide. I threw this together. This is a kind of a unique slide. And how many of you have seen this stuff on TV? This is what you see on TV. This is a typical. This is a Western fire. What I was told, you guys wanted me to talk about Western fire, and I will, as we keep going on through my presentation here, give you my experience and what I've done in my fire career since I was 18 years old. So yeah, this is just a picture that I threw up with that. That is a typical forest fire in the West, and that can happen here too. And we're going to talk a little bit about that also. So let's talk a little bit so you get to know me. In 1984, I entered the fire service in my hometown volunteer department, the town of North Brookfield, Massachusetts. I came up through the ranks as a private, a ladder lieutenant, the rescue captain, and then I stayed a rescue captain of that town until and you'll see as we go down the list, into 2001 when I was hired by a neighboring town as a fire chief. So I was on 2 departments for a period of time. Along with that, in 1986, I started my own tree and land clearing business. So as you can imagine, I was kind of a busy guy. Along with that, I joined the state of Massachusetts, the Wildland Fire Crew, which the state of Connecticut has the same type of crew. Anybody familiar with when seen us going out, on the news, you may see Connecticut firefighters or Massachusetts firefighters, depending on what TV station you use or watch, that we get dispatched throughout the country. You've probably seen that on TV before. Well, in 1999, I got involved with the state of Mass. It kind of fell into place for me because I was in the forestry business most of my life. I started working in the woods at 13 on the farm. We had our own land. We cut our own wood off our own land, logs and firewood. Along with, I learned, started working also during the summers between picking hay and working for a tree service. So I learned how to climb. So I was a pretty good climber in my day. I did a lot of big time climbing and removals. So it kind of fell into place when I got, with me being in the fire service, me getting involved with the state of Massachusetts Type 2. It's a hand crew, and I say Type 2, we're not a full-time bunch. The crew's made up of employees throughout the state and local firefighters. It's not like a Forest Service crew where they're specifically put together and they're a seasonal full-time crew. They all stay together for the whole fire season. In the eastern states here, we don't have the amount of fires they do out west, so we have throw-together crews because we all have other jobs. So does that make sense? Okay. So, along with that, through Connections, I started teaching nationally. I became, my job on the crew, along with my profession, is I cut trees. I was a professional logger through my business, And with the fire crew, that was my job, is I put trees in the ground to make the crew safe. Any dead trees, any fire burned out trees where we had to work, I would go in first and we'd take care of that stuff. We run that the same way in Connecticut as we do anywhere else in the country. It's the same deal. We have specific folks that are qualified to cut those hazard trees. So, again, I started teaching that nationally throughout in Colorado, through the state of New York, New Mexico, and parts of Utah, while I was living in Massachusetts. Okay? So, in 2009, my wife said I had a midlife crisis. I decided that had been self-employed, been on a volunteer fire department. I wanted to do something different with my career. I was getting older, decided that I'm going to go do this before I get too old. So through connections, I was able to secure a job in southwest Colorado. I went out as an engine captain, and I actually ran a wildland fire division for the Los Pinos Fire District. Okay, you see that, and I've got some pictures here coming up. I'm just going to run down through the timeline, and we'll start moving on. But I moved to Colorado for the fire job. Okay, that was with the Archuleta County Emergency Management. So it was a division of emergency management in a county that had a wildland fire program. So I stayed there for 3 years at that job, and in 2012, the neighboring community hired me as a full-time wildland coordinator and division chief to run their wildland fire division. Something that's real interesting about that is we covered 400 square miles. So how many square miles is Barkhamsted or Hartland, or probably 20. Okay, so 30. So think about how many fire stations in Hartland? Just one? Two. Okay. East and west. So that covers, for you, that covers 34 square miles. Think about, I covered 400 square miles with 5 stations. Sometimes it took me 2 hours to get to a fire.
Wow.
So totally different fire programs from the East Coast to the West Coast. Okay? Lot of open land. I was surrounded by federal land. I worked daily with the U.S. Forest Service, Bureau of Indian Affairs, or the BIA, Bureau of Land Management. 2 states and 2 counties to my fire district. And I had, it was a very unique fire district because due to unable to get into parts of New Mexico due to terrain, you had to come into Colorado to get into New Mexico. So through an MOU or an agreement with our fire district, we covered a big part, about 100 square miles of land in New Mexico. So it was a very busy area. Southwest Colorado has the most starts in Colorado, and I mean fire starts. And how do you think that probably happens? Lightning. Yeah. So that's something we don't have a lot of here. 99% of fires in Connecticut are started by they're human caused. There's only 1%. There are lightning strikes. And we're going to talk a little bit about that further in the program. But we have had lightning strikes in Massachusetts, where I was, did 25 years before I went to Colorado. I was on 2 lightning strike fires in the state of Massachusetts, and that was through the state with the state hand crew. Okay, so this is a picture of what my remote station. This is Arborlees, Colorado. It's if you look to the right, that's looking about due east, and just on that ridge top, it kind of looked about due east, a little south. I'm looking in New Mexico. So it was right on the border. And these are the wildland engines that I built that program. They didn't have a program when I got there in 2012. So this is a picture from 2017, and that's what I built. That was a volunteer station, and the fire department had transitioned into full-time career firefighters. So that was when I was hired in that transition time. So the white truck on the end, that was my chief's vehicle. The next one too is a typical brush truck that you see around here. It's called a Type 6 engine. State of Connecticut we have several of those that are state-owned. Next to that is just a heavier engine, which a lot of your fire departments have. For a national name on that truck, it's a Type 3 engine. It's actually an interface, an urban interface rig that we can fight structure fire or we use in a wildland fire. Okay? The military truck that I actually built that truck in 2016. That was a military surplus truck that was totally redone. So I was very proud of that truck. That carries 2,000 gallons of water and has the ability for extreme off-road where we can get water. So along with this, we did a pretty good prescribed fire program. How many folks in here are familiar with prescribed fire? Okay. Anybody any idea why we do prescribed fire, or do you think we just go out and set fires just to play?
Maybe so that if there's already part of the area burned down, the fire can't get as good.
Okay, yeah, that's really good. We do for fuels reduction. Think about when your wood stove, when there's only a little bit of wood in the wood stove, what's it do? It doesn't burn very much. But when you put more wood in your wood stove, what happens? You have a big fire. That's how we heat our houses. Okay? The same thing with the forest. If we can reduce fuels by using fire, that's a natural way of reducing fuels. Okay? The only thing about fire in the forest, what does it do to our forest? It's good for it, but we don't like looking at it though. How many of you have seen the remnants of a forest fire? Okay, right here locally?
Out west.
Yeah, and out west too. It looks very destructive, right? But it's nature's way of cleansing the forest. Does that sound right? It sure is. Over the years in the Northeast, we've taken fire out of the element, and Jerry and I are going to talk about that a little bit when we get into his program. And unfortunately, we have what we have today. We have a lot of invasive species. We have a huge amount of fuels on the ground in the forest. So we're going to have a higher intense forest fire, right? So what do you think that does to the forest?
It damages the big trees.
It damages the big trees. And when we get into the next program, we'll talk about that a little bit more. Okay? That's just a picture of me with one of my structure engines. It was actually I was at a training day and somebody snapped that picture and there I am. Okay. So now we're going to talk a little bit about, let's look what we see in the background. Okay, if I tell you, you'd never guess where that is. Do you think that's Connecticut or Massachusetts? No, it's not. That is actually, anybody been to Crater Lake National Park in Oregon? Well, that is Crater Lake right there. That's a remote area of Crater Lake. That's actually an old log landing. I actually flew in, if you guys want to pass this around. This is a flight helmet. I was on a helitack crew for a number of years. Did a lot of flying. And this is what a helitack helmet looks like that we use in the fire world. There's actually some gloves in there. Pull out those. There's some different gloves than what you normally would see. Those are Nomex flight gloves. But that was me. That I actually dropped in and we cut that helispot open to make it a medevac site. So we had a lot of crews spread out a long ways away from anything. These roads, there was old roads there. Obviously, they had done some logging. But if you look at the reprod that's on the outside of that circle that we cut, that's what that log landing looked like after, before we cut it. There was just enough room for the helicopter to land, and that's why we were able to get in there to cut it out. And right there, the fire blew up, so I'm waiting for the helicopter to come back and pick me up and get us out of there. So yeah, that's Crater Lake National Park. That was in 2017. Okay, that was a natural fire, lightning caused, burned all summer. We let it burn. We were just managing, didn't want to get into where the structures are in the national park. So that being a natural start, they let it go. Okay, so we just managed it and tried to steer it where away from anything that it could hurt. Okay. Anybody been to Wyoming? Shoshone, anybody, does this sign look familiar to anybody? What river is this in the Shoshone? The Wind River. Yeah. There's actually a new movie out on Netflix, if anybody's seen it. Well, it's not new, it's been out for a year, called Wind River. It took place in Wyoming in the Shoshone. So this was a fire that I was on an engine. I had my crew, and this is on the main highway, and the fire is actually, we're a long ways away, and there's a reason we were a long ways away. It's because the fire is making a major run, a crown run, which is that's the spectacular stuff that you guys see on TV a lot, is when you see those spectacular flame lengths and big plumes, columns of smoke. Well, that fire right there we're letting it do its thing. Aircraft are working that fire right now, and actually this was almost to the point where they even shut the aircraft down because it was so windy. So. All right. So I think I pointed that truck out in front of my fire station in Arborlease, Colorado. That's my chief's truck. It was white, but what do we got on it right there? It's covered with retardant. Oh. This is actually north of Ukiah, California. I was a division supervisor, which I was running a big section of the fire in California. And at the time in 2017, this was October of 2017, almost into November. This at this time was the biggest fire in Cal Fire or California's history. We lost 3,500 structures on this fire, which was unheard of, okay? What happened in 2018 in California? Massive fire. One fire, the Camp Fire, burned 18,000 structures. 18,000. This went from, the fire I was on, from 3,500 to 18,000 in 1 year. Pretty impressive. And it's sad to see what these fires do, but this one that I was on was not a natural start. A wind event came through and knocked power lines down. So that's what started. But and it went 60 to 80 mile an hour winds that drove this fire here. A lot of devastation. One thing that I was really exposed to on this fire, which I had never been before, is this is Humboldt County, California. Has anybody been to Humboldt County, California? Does anybody know what Humboldt County, California is known for? Marijuana. Did I hear it over here?
Yeah.
Okay. In these hills of Humboldt, California, where I was on this fire, massive marijuana grows. I had never been around that stuff in my life. And we were actually, on my division that I was running, I had 9 dozers pushing fire line in. We're going to talk about fire line and what that is in a little bit. We were pushing through marijuana groves with about 6-inch diameter stems on marijuana. Huge, old operations. So that was kind of a culture shock for me, a kid from New England out in California playing fire in the marijuana groves. It was pretty unique. The whole town, I never knew what marijuana smelled like. The whole town, I thought, boy, there's a lot of skunks around here. The whole town smelled Redwood, the town of Redwood, which was where we were staging out of to go into this fire, which was just north of Ukiah. It was unbelievable. When I realized what it was, I said, oh, this is great. So,
Rocky Mountain High.
yeah.
Did you get to drive the
Except
bulldozer?
we were in California.
Did you get to drive the bulldozer too?
I did not know. I was actually, doing the tactical stuff
No,
on that fire.
It must have been fun.
Oh yeah,
For
the
the
guys in the dozers loved it.
Yeah.
Push it over. Okay. Now, how many of you heard of the story of the Granite Mountain Hotshots or have seen the movie that came out about the 19 that got killed in Arizona in the town of Yarnell? Well, this is the town of Yarnell. I was assigned to, this is the first fire after the guys got killed. The actual fire that killed them, that would have been 2 years prior, was actually behind that truck. Out in that, there's actually another mountain range like you see in there. you know, about a half a mile behind that truck. In the town of Yarnell, you're looking at it to both sides of the road. That fire we had the fatalities on was on that side, and this new fire, you can actually see how this is all black right here? The fire started down here the day before and made a major run through around the town. I was in Arizona on another fire, and they pulled us off this. I was there the very next morning after it ran around town. Didn't lose any structures, but what do you think the sentiment of the folks in town were with what was going on?
Scared.
Yeah, this was dynamic for me. Being in the fire service for, you know, at this point, you know, 33 years or so, I've been fortunate to see a lot of fire. And this fire we did not engage on. We protected the structures, that was it. All because of that dynamics of when those folks got killed, they were scared to put firefighters back in there in that fuel tank. And it was the same management team. What a management team is folks that run the fire. And you may see there's usually one person, an incident commander, and then we have all, you know, operational folks that work under that incident commander, support staff. Well, it's the same team where those folks were, the fatality, were working this fire too. And this was 2 years in between fire. So town of Yarnell was still shaken about this. And there was a local hotshot crew, a local hand crew from Prescott, Arizona. It was actually one of the few non-federal hotshot crews in the country. It was through Prescott Fire Department in Prescott, Arizona. So this was when I was pulling up on the fire. I was actually on my way into the incident command post to get my assignment where they wanted us. I pulled off the side of the road because to the left I could actually see there's a marker you can see out on the mountain with an American flag where the guys were killed. And I stopped to see that, and I took this picture at the same time. So that's a day-old fire right there. Burned around town the night before, and then that's what we were working on that day. Still protecting structures. Okay, so this is 2018. This is the state of Connecticut's interagency hand crew, and that just happens to be Monarch Pass in Colorado. Last summer, I took the crew out for a regular tour that we do when we get ordered up as a hand crew. So we were able to go to Gunnison, Colorado. There was several fires in Colorado at that time. So me coming from Colorado, I had just left Colorado. I was back. Half the folks that are on this fire I knew like brothers. So it was kind of unique to bring the Connecticut crew back out to the turf that I played in for almost 10 years. It was really, really neat. So yeah, this was actually on our way home. We stopped along Highway 50, Monarch Pass. And there's actually a Monarch ski area that's right near this. As you can see, some beautiful country. Okay, and while we were out there, I thought you guys might like this. Anybody recognize what kind of tree that is? It's anybody that's been in the West? Cedar. It's a cedar or a juniper tree. You talk about pinyon juniper. That particular tree I found, I was actually an operations chief on this fire. I came off the crew to run because I knew all the guys there. We had several fires. They put me in charge of this operations on this fire. And me scouting the fire, I found this. And so
It's huge.
okay, and I'll tell you just the size. This is this tool, which is called the Pulaski. So I just did that as a size reference. So think about this, especially this part of Colorado. There isn't a lot of water, so it takes years for those trees to grow. Anybody have any idea how old that tree is? A few hundred?
Yeah,
Okay, I got a few hundred.
1,000 years.
Okay, any other guess? That tree is estimated to be around 500 years old. Take or leave it, you know, some. So think about, and they don't grow tall. That tree was about 30 feet tall, but it was all this bigger, round numbers, around 500 years old. So think of the history that tree has seen and what has happened in that country in that amount of time. And there's several of those trees in the West like that still.
Do you know approximately the diameter?
I did not measure it, so just think it, you know, that's why I held that tool up. So,
So 10 feet.
yeah, it's probably a 10-foot, you know, diameter on it. Sure. I just thought you guys might think that was kind of neat, so I threw it in
was
there.
there before our country was a country.
Oh, sure was. Think about the Native Americans that lived in this country. They probably sat against that tree. Okay. As we're talking about things that I did in Colorado, this is another job that I did in the wintertime. So I did my 40-hour-a-week job with the fire district, and then I did it, and this was my second 40-hour-a-week job. I was the trail superintendent for the local fire department, for the local snowmobile club, the Wolf Creek Trailblazers. Right there, that's about 9,000 feet elevation, and right up behind there, right up along that ridge, and that's the Continental Divide right there. If anybody's familiar with Wolf Creek Pass, south of Pagosa Springs, Colorado, that's where I lived. Right there is about 13,000 feet elevation. That was a beautiful day. There's about 8 or 9 feet of snow that I'm parked on top of right there. So that was another interesting job that I did while I was in Colorado. I ran snowcat, so good deal. It was fun for a while. After 7 years of doing it, it wasn't fun anymore. I'd had enough, so we got somebody else in the seat. Plus, I came here. So I couldn't do it if I was here. So that leads us to where I am today. Working for the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, or state. What was the title before, Jerry? It was just straight DEP, Department of Environmental Protection.
We have the extra E.
Yeah, we have the extra E. Then I hear rumors that the extra E may be taken back out. The Department of Energy may be on its own. Who knows? Who knows with the state? So, but you know, the forest fire program and forestry program is well alive in Connecticut, and Jerry will be able to tell you a little bit more about the forestry and what direction they're going in. You know, with the tree cutting program, we're going to talk a little bit about the state of trees also. Where our trees are. We're having an attack in the forest of every kind of thing that you can imagine. So how do you think that ties back into fire? A lot of dead trees, a lot of fuel, right? Cool. Okay, and that's my contact information. I have business cards too. If you would like to call me anytime, my primary job is to assist the cities and towns of Connecticut with training and then actual on-the-ground, boots-on-the-ground firefighting. So, we don't have a big event of that. Certain years, like last year, I only responded to 2 fires in the western part of Connecticut. I mean, think about how wet it was. So we'll talk a little bit about weather in New England when we get into Jerry's program. But any questions? That's just a brief overview of some western fire stuff. Sir?
I was just wondering, when you're working one of the big fires like out west, what's the length of the workday? Is it just 8 hours, or do you work longer than that, or?
We generally work 12 to 16 a day. When we get an assignment, our typical assignment is 16 days. 14 days on the fire line and a travel day each side. So we try, we go out there, we try to work as many hours as we can. The last year on that Colorado assignment with the Connecticut Hand Crew, we worked 250 plus hours. So in 14 days. But you get paid for your travel also. So, there was 2 days of travel there that.
Did you find out why those 7 were killed, those people, what they did wrong, or?
Oh, the 19?
I'm sorry, yeah.
The 19 in Arizona, the ones you're talking about?
Yeah,
Yeah, we know what happened.
okay,
Bad decisions.
okay.
It was totally bad decisions on their part. They were in a safe area, and it comes down to communication and accountability of knowing where your folks are all the time. And when we talk about type 1 or hotshot crews, a lot of times they work on their own. They don't have to work under direction of the IC, especially when you've got an initial attack, an emerging incident that's just happening where you're making things happen. That's what the hotshot crews are, along the type 2, like the type 2 IA initial attack crews that we have here in Connecticut or New England, we do the same thing. We're just not that organized full-time that work together all the time. Those folks, make decisions to try to wrangle fire in, and they just made some bad decisions. And it was extreme fire spread. I mean, it was fire spread that had never been seen. There hadn't been fire in this area for 45 years. So it's had a lot of fuel buildup, a lot of prolonged drought. And the prolonged drought and weather, and we'll talk about weather a little bit in the next program, but weather is everything when it comes to wildland, fire in the forest. So pretty obvious. It's either, if it's dry, it can burn. If it's wet, it's not going to burn. It's pretty common sense. So.
You said you aim to protect the structure sometimes, because you can't do much with the other fires. I say simply, but is your approach to just wet them down, wet?
Okay. One way we do it is, we get boots in the ground to protect the structure. We try to put an engine at each structure, but depending on the fire activity, a lot of times we have to leave. As you see in some of the film footage that you see on TV, there's no way that you as a firefighter can stay in. You do your best to prep around the structures, and we do the same exact thing here. We remove any fuels that can possibly burn your house, wood piles, brush up against the house, weeds, anything like that. A lot of times the fire fronts will blow through the houses or the housing development, and it's residual fire where fire had gotten in, embers have got into your jet work, have gotten into wood piles, have got embers under a deck where there was a lot of leaves or needles. That's a lot what burns your houses in. And that happens right here in New England. I mean, fuel is fuel. It doesn't matter what part of the country it's in. So, yes?
If there's a local fire in the woods, how are decisions made around involving the town fire department versus you guys?
Okay.
How does that work?
Yeah, the fire departments in Connecticut everything is within their jurisdiction. So right here in Hartland Fire, they have a certain perimeter of what they're responsible for, right? Just like if you go to Barkhamsted, they're in charge of that. So even state land that's within your town limits, the local fire department has the responsibility of initial attacking that fire. Because of the way the state is set up, we only have, my fire headquarters is in Middlebury. Okay, I do have, trucks spread out throughout Western Connecticut, but, we basically, other than the seasonals that I have and me, they're the only firefighting force that's full-time in Connecticut. Other than, then you go to the east side, they have the same thing. My buddy Rich Shank, I don't know if anybody's been at a presentation that he's put on, but he's responsible for everything east of the river, and he has the same setup as we do in the west. So think about multiple fires, we can get stretched out real thin, real fast. And Jerry's lived that, here in Connecticut, working fires with nobody, right? Right, Jerry? With very few. And what happens with what do you think really affects the volunteer fire departments when it comes to a brush fire? It's tying folks up, especially, and usually during the day, right? Brush fires don't burn very well at night, okay, because of weather, and we have moisture recovery overnight, the relative humidity. So normally brush fires bank down at night. So during the day, and most volunteer fire departments, when they are most vulnerable with no help, during the day. During the day, because folks have other jobs, okay? So this is where the state helps supplement into that, okay? Especially on prolonged events, because guys need to go back to their regular jobs. They can't take several days in a row off, right? So what we do at the state is we supplement manpower from our state parks. We depend on maintainers. We train maintainers, full-time foresters. That's part of their job description, to fight fire. So that's our work. That's really our main workforce when it comes to firefighting in Connecticut. You're depending on parks personnel and forestry personnel to fight fires, to help out the forest control folks. They'll drive trucks for us. We'll actually put crews together to dig line if we have to dig line, lay hose lines, whatever we need to do. We do have quite a bit of equipment that we can do that with, and it helps cities and towns. I mean, we try to have equipment that the towns and that they don't have. Mainly, you know, having that off-road capability that a lot of the towns don't have some of the equipment that we have. So does that make sense? And we have, you know, folks that have a lot of, you know, wildland knowledge, where a lot of the fire department folks here don't have that wildland knowledge because we don't have an occurrence like you see in the West. We do have it, but just not as often. And, you know, and talk about structural loss. But I'm holding off on talking about weather until we get into Jerry's
Why
presentation.
don't we let Jerry get started, because we're 45 minutes in.
Yeah.
And then we'll have a chance after Jerry's done for lots of questions.
Yeah. Sounds good. So call me anytime. There's my information. I'll give you a card. See me at the end of the presentation. I'd be more than glad to talk to anyone anytime. So, thank you.
Well, Tim's finding my presentation. My name is Jerry Milne. I work for the DEP Division of Forestry. I work in the State Lands Management Program. My office is in the Pleasant Valley office on West River Road. I supervise 3 other foresters. I see one is right there. We just hired him 2 weeks ago, Jeremy Clark, who lives in town. We have 4 foresters for the western half of the state. It's about 75,000 acres of state forest that we manage for saw timber, firewood, recreation, and wildlife habitat. So the title of the presentation is Fire on the Mountain. And anybody guess where this picture was taken? It wasn't taken out in Arizona. It was taken right here in Connecticut. That was Schaghticoke Mountain in Kent. You can see the Housatonic River on the right side. And the fire started up on top of the hill where the Appalachian Trail is, and just beyond that fire is New York State. So we do get big fires in Connecticut. A little bit about forest fire history in the state. Native Americans used fire to improve hunting, create fields for growing crops. They would burn the woods and improve blueberry production, burn out the understory so they can see better, get more greenery, so that attract the game. So it was for hunting. They grew corn, they grew maize, they grew pumpkins and beans. So they needed fields also. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, wildfire was rampant in Connecticut. There were a lot of train tracks, and the trains were spewing sparks from the smokestacks, and there'd be a trail of fires every time a train went by. All these fires would start behind the train and go up the hill. Very, very common. In fact, that's why Massaco State Forest in Simsbury was acquired as a demonstration area. There was a train bed went through Massaco State through that property, and the state tried to show if you had good forest management and good fire suppression, you could control fires from trains. There was a lot of charcoal being made in the 1800s, and when you make charcoal, you clear cut an acre of forest, you pile up the 20 cords of wood in a big hearth, you cover up that hearth with dirt, and then you light it from underneath inside. And over the course of a couple of weeks, it would smolder and burn slowly, and then that 20 cords of wood would gradually go down to about maybe 5 or 6 cords of charcoal. Well, anytime you have fire in the woods, sometimes it gets away. And the entire landscape of Connecticut was clear cut every 30 years to create charcoal. And charcoal was used in the iron kilns. It was used to cure tobacco in the Farmington Valley. It was used to make bricks, brick kilns. So it was used for a variety of purposes. And you'll find old charcoal mounds in the woods around here all over the place. Chestnut blight. Early 1900s, 1911, the chestnut blight hits Connecticut's forests. Chestnut made up about 25% of the trees in the state at the time. So you can imagine just the course of a few years, 1/4 of the trees were dead. That's a lot of fuel to burn. And the firefighting capability was not that great back then. This is a typical example of what the forest would have looked like in Connecticut at the turn of the last century. The trees weren't that big because they'd been repeatedly clear cut and they were repeatedly burned. And this is one of the reasons why the state created a forestry department. One was to put out fires, and the other was to convince landowners that if you there was no incentive for landowners to take good care of their property, because what's the point of planting trees if they're going to burn down in a few years? What's the point of doing a thinning in your woods to improve the overall quality of the trees if it's just going to burn down in a few years? So the state developed a firefighting program, and they started buying state forests as a demonstration area to private landowners as how to best manage the forest. So you can see how crude it was to fight fires back then. You couldn't really do much. So, and back then, it was about, I think it was 1915, it was 100,000 acres burned in Connecticut. Now it's, on average, it's about 1,000 acres depending on the weather each year. That's statewide. And this is what's called a backing fire. You can see the smoke is going up the hill, but the fire is slowly backing down the hill. So this would be a very easy fire to control. You could put in a fire break, maybe with a leaf blower, blow out the leaves, or with fire rakes, you could create a fire break, and that fire would gradually burn down the hill. It would be very easy to patrol that line and to keep it under control.
Jerry, can I just jump in with that 1 second?
Sure.
So I talked about the intensity of fire with the amount of fuels. This is the type of fire we like to see in the forests in Connecticut. Why do you think? It's nice backing, nice low flame lengths, low intensity, right? So that probably will not hurt the bigger trees. It's when we get those big, the big fuel loads, get into large mountain laurel stands. Mountain laurel burns very hot and intense, and that kills a lot of the oak trees. And some of that you'll see here in a few minutes, what we're talking about.
A lot of people don't know this. A lot of fires are started by birds. But almost all wildfires in Connecticut are caused by people. Arson, there are a lot of people out there who like to see fire, and they play with matches and they start fires. A lot of people are burning brush, and the brush gets out of hand, especially in the fall. They're burning leaves, or in the spring, they're burning all the wood, the branches that came down over the winter. A lot of fires start that way. A lot of fires start with campfires, unattended campfires. Under normal circumstances, they go out by themselves, but if you have a dry spell, all of a sudden, all these campfires, wind picks up, they blow the embers into the woods, and now you have a fire. And oftentimes, these campfires are in really difficult places to get to. They're on overlooks, along trails, like the Appalachian Trail. Very hard to get to, very hard to put out. And children. A lot of our fires start late in the afternoon after school gets out. If you have a spring break in April, and the kids are out of school, and it's a warm, sunny day, and it's 70 degrees, and there's a nice breeze, there's a good chance you're going to have a fire. So, as Tim mentioned, we're not usually the first ones on the scene of a fire. Usually it's a fire department. Someone smells smoke, they see flames, they call 911, the fire department goes out there. And then we get called in once the fire department realizes it's way too big for them, or it's going to go into the night, it's going to be a multiple day event, and they have to go back to their jobs. So they call us in, and we get called. Usually it's late in the afternoon, you've been working all day marking timber or marking boundaries, and the last thing you want to do is go to a fire. But you get the call, are you available? And I feel sorry for Tim, because he's got a call from the state parks. It might be Kent Falls State Park, it might be Sherwood Island State Park in Westport, it might be Sleeping Giant State Park in Hampton. He's got to try to find one or two people from each state park who might be available to fight a fire. So it could be hours before the state gets there. When I get called to a fire, the first thing I try to do is go to the office. And that's not because I'm hiding, it's because I can have access on the computer to a GIS, Geographic Information System. And on our GIS, we have access to topographic maps for the entire state, aerial photos for the entire state. So if I can get a rough idea where the fire is, I can print out some maps, I can look at the aerial photos. Are there roads, are there trails, are there power lines, are there ponds, are there streams, anything I can use for better access, or anything I can use as a natural barrier once I get there. I can also download the map onto a GPS. So when I'm on the fire, because most of the time I'm someplace I've never been before, and sometimes it's getting dark, at least I know where I am on the GPS. So some things to take into account. When you get there, what kind of terrain are you in? Is it steep slopes? Is it flat? Are there any, like I said, any fire breaks you can take advantage of? What kind of fuels do you have? If it's grass, it's going to burn very fast, but it's also very easy to put out. If it's like dried grass, because water will hit it, knock it right down. If it's laurel, as Tim mentioned, burns very hot. It tends to be in the understory. The lower branches die off, but they're still there, very dry, very brittle, and it burns very quickly. And if you're in a thicket of laurel, you can't get out of it. Other water sources, what kind of manpower and equipment are available. Usually the fire department's there, and usually when you show up, they want to go. And it's like, it's just me, you can't go yet. But they will often stay behind, and they might shuttle water from where there's a fire hydrant, at least shuttle water to you. And then slowly you have to wait for the people from all the different state parks to get there. What's the weather forecast? Sometimes they're calling for thunderstorms. There's a good chance of thunderstorms, and maybe you don't have to fight the fire quite as aggressively, or maybe they're calling for rain the next day, heavy rain. That can influence how you attack the fire. But if they're not calling for rain for a long time, you might have to go in there and attack it more quickly before it gets out of hand. Time of year is important. In the springtime, the ground is moist. It still has the snow melt, and the ground is moist, the soil is moist, but you might have dry leaves on top. So it's easy to get a spring fire because you just hit the leaves with water, it'll go out. Or you can get a leaf blower and blow the leaves off the fire line, and once it hits, the fire hits that leaf, the blown out fire line, it'll go out. It's summertime is more difficult because you get ground fire. If it hasn't rained in a long time, and when you get a fire, it not only burns the surface, but it goes into the roots. It goes into the duff, that organic layer. It just burns and smolders very slowly. Then it pops up, and it hits some leaves, and now it takes off again. And you can't tell it's there. So you really have to, when you have ground fire, you have to get a fire rake it up, and together with water, the two people working together have to get the water down into where the roots are. So it's two people working together mechanically and with water to get the fire out. Very, very tedious process. We talk about different kinds of fuels. These are called ladder fuels. If you're in a spruce plantation or a pine plantation, you'll have a lot of lower dead branches. And if those lower branches burn, they're going to hit the upper branches, and pretty soon the whole tree is on fire. So you wouldn't want to put a fire break through a plantation where you have ladder fuels, because it's going to jump across the fire break. Mountain laurel is the state flower. It's very pretty, but it's also very prone to fire. The leaves are flammable. The lower branches are very flammable. It tends to grow in thickets, and you can't get up a mountain laurel thicket fast enough. This is a mountain laurel thicket that burned. You can see all the dead stems. It's resprouting the following spring. They do resprout, and actually the leaves are nicer after they resprout after a fire. And we have a guy outside of Albany, New York, who buys mountain laurel boughs from us for floral arrangements. So he likes to go in after a fire because they're nice dark green leaves. They look good in flower arrangements. If we can, we'll make a fire break using maybe leaf blower again or fire rakes, and then we might burn out with a drip torch or a fusee and just let the fire slowly burn up to the main fire. The two fires hit, and then you have all this burned out area that's safe to patrol. Again, if you have a nice smooth fire line, it's a lot easier than having to go up and down the slope trying to patrol the line the next day looking for hot spots. So we try to make a nice smooth line, maybe in a valley or in a plateau, something like that. We also have on the left, that's a bombardier. It's like a little tank on treads, and it has a 100-gallon water tank on its back, and you can drive it through the woods and get right up to the fire sometimes and hit it with the hose. We used to have helicopters on fires. I don't know if we still have an arrangement with the National Guard.
Just was there today.
Oh, yeah?
Yes.
So,
We're back in business.
back in business. It's, I think the state troopers have state police have a
Yeah,
helicopter.
they have a light helicopter that we use for recon, but anything that, when we get into fires that warrants having a helicopter, we have to use the Air National Guard. and that's a Chinook helicopter right there. I was just at Bradley Airport this morning with a meeting with those folks. I actually had my hand on one of those Chinooks, and they're ready to start training in the spring with us. So that's back in play now.
They're very expensive to run.
$10,000 an hour for that helicopter.
So that's a last resort. They can be effective if you have. It has to be really in the spring when there's no leaves on the trees. If you try to drop water when there's leaves on the trees, it's not going to penetrate very well. It's not going to be any good for ground fire. But if you have running fire and there's no leaves on the trees, it has potential. But you have to coordinate with the crews, make sure there's no crews underneath. Was that a 1,000-gallon tank of water?
2,000.
2,000. So you don't want any crews underneath when they're dropping water. You don't want to get hit by any fish. That's not good. But we occasionally have used that in the past. So this is the kind of damage that happens to trees after a forest fire. What usually happens is the fire races up the hill, and it heats up the fuel above it, and so the flames, as they go up the hill, they lick the upper trunk, the uphill side of the trunk more than the downhill side. So you'll see scars usually on the uphill side a few years later. So these are trees that were not killed, but they were badly damaged by a fire. And the birches and maples tend to get damaged more than the oaks because they have thinner bark. And
Think about that. How would that affect your personal land? If you've got land that you manage logs off of, look at what that does to your number one log. That's your most value right there.
So the tree on the right, the red oak, oaks have thicker bark. It does have a scar. That first couple of feet of the log would be affected, be discolored, but the tree in the back of the yellow birch, and the birch has oil of wintergreen in it. It's very flammable, and the birches have thinner bark, and they get damaged a lot more than the oaks do.
That looks like it's on the downhill side. Is it just the angle?
Yeah, it could be. Usually it's the uphill side, but usually it's the uphill side that gets worse. But you can influence. One of the reasons we have so many oaks in Connecticut is that we had so many fires in the 1800s, early 1900s. It killed a lot of the birches and a lot of the maples. And the oaks had thicker bark and they survived. More damage caused by fires. Again, these are birches and red maples. This is Naugatuck State Forest. The fire can get up pretty high, 4 or 5 feet up. And it definitely damages the lumber. Another example of a birch tree, that's probably 6 feet up, and it's going to be hollow. It's good for wildlife, I guess, but it's not good for lumber. This is a oak tree. This was damaged by fire. You can see there's some laurel sprouting underneath it. You can see the laurel in the background was killed back, died back, but the roots are still alive and it's resprouting. But that's the canopy of the oak. It killed the oak tree.
Basically cooked it, and it boiled the water under the bark, killed it.
This is Naugatuck State Forest in Beacon Falls. This picture was west of Route 8 after we had a fire go through quite a while ago. It does a lot of damage to the forest. And sometimes the damage you may not see for decades later. We had a timber harvest in Tungus State Forest maybe 15 years ago, and the logger was complaining that all the oak trees he cut, he had these cracks. It's called ring shake. There were these cracks where the rings are, and we did some research and turned out there was a fire there in 1918. So when the trees were this big, there was a fire, caused a lot of scarring, and ever since then, when the tree grew, it was growing on like unsound wood, and it caused cracks throughout the rest of the trunk. This is you can see it's a small oak, maybe a 2-inch, 3-inch diameter oak, and it got damaged by a fire, but the roots are still alive and it's resprouting. And in front of it is sassafras, and sassafras has a lot of underground roots, rhizomes, and if there's a fire, they'll resprout very quickly. Again, the oak tree is dead, is killed, the trunk is killed, but the roots are still alive and it's sprouting. The oak sprouts are coming from the roots. So oaks are more adaptable to fire than trees like black birch and red maple. So this was the infamous Schaghticoke Mountain Fire, 2001. It started along the Appalachian Trail. If you look at the topographic map, you'll see New York State's to the west, Connecticut to the right, and that yellow spot on the top, I think, is where it started. There was an overlook along the Appalachian Trail. That's the biggest fire I've been on. It was in the fall. It was a high fire danger day. It was, I think it was November, and there were a lot of oak leaves on the ground, fresh fuel. It hadn't rained in a long time, and that's what it looked like. I mean, that's Connecticut. You don't expect that in Connecticut. It was really hard to get to because it was in New York State. New York has what's called forest rangers, and their job in New York, we don't have forest rangers in Connecticut. Their job in New York is fire suppression, search and rescue, and they inspect timber harvest for best management practices for logging jobs. So they're very specialized in what they do. And so we worked with them to put the fire out. It took about a week. That's the fire line from the air. And we were there at night, and it was creepy because you could hear these trees crashing at night. You could just hear them crashing. And you never knew where the next one was going to fall because there was ground fire. It was burning the roots. You had these old snags, and they would just fall over, and you just never knew where the next one was going to hit. It was really creepy. About 400 acres. This was the view from River Road that parallels the Housatonic River in Kent, looking up, and there's just smoke. And that's the next summer, July 2002, and you can see all the organic matter has been burned. And if there was a heavy rain, some of that soil would have been eroded because there's just nothing to hold the soil in place. So we'll go back a little bit, but we still get fires like this. We had a fire April 2 years ago along the Appalachian Trail in Kent. You get a call late in the afternoon, you drive down through Warren, down into Route 7, and you just see fire. The entire valley is full of smoke. And that was, again, the Appalachian Trail. They think some kids from the South Kent school started it. And we had a fire, I think we had one in Salisbury on Mount Riga a few years ago when Jeremy was with us. That was the Appalachian Trail also. Really hard to get to. Fire is used to maintain habitat for many early successional species. As our forests get older and bigger, a lot of species that require fields and young forests, thickets, are slowly dying out. Things like rabbits, golden-winged warblers, ruffed grouse. I haven't heard of ruffed grouse in probably 25 years. Despite all the cutting we're doing to try to create that kind of habitat that they need. Woodcock, towhees, warblers, prairie warblers, they all need grasslands and early successional habitats. They like power lines, for example, because they're always maintained, small growth. This is, so where we have grasslands, old fields, sometimes we try to burn them to keep them that way. This is Naugatuck State Forest. There's some apple trees in there. So we'll do prescribed burns. You may have heard of or seen the burn we did off of Route 20 in West Hartland last year.
Yeah.
And that was designed just to keep it open. There are bobolinks that nest in that field. The burn had to be done before the bobolinks came back to nest. And that burn was like 5 years in the planning because every time we tried to burn it, we'd get a late snow, it would rain. It was really difficult to finally find a narrow window when you can get everybody from the parks to be there on the crew, plus have the right weather conditions. And this is a field that in Naugatuck State Forest that was burned in the spring, and the following, that same summer, this is what it looked like. So it comes back really quick. And then the biologists will come in and do bird census and see how the wildlife respond to the burn. So a fire in Connecticut can definitely reduce timber quality. It can influence the composition of the forest. Oaks, for example, respond more readily to fire than black birches or red maples. And what we're finding is with fewer fires, the forests are succeeding to more maples and birches and not so much oaks in the understory. It can be used to promote oak regeneration, and it can be used to improve wildlife habitat. And obviously, this picture was taken quite a while ago. Any questions? Yes.
I was curious, I know out west there are certain species of trees that need fire or appreciate fire to be able to germinate seeds. And you said, 100 or more years ago, wildfires were rampant here. Are there any species of trees in the east
Yes.
that would need fire, and are they now endangered because we don't have so many?
Yes, pitch pine. We have 2 pitch pine natural area preserves in Connecticut, one in Hopewell Pond State Park in eastern Connecticut, where the foresters have done a prescribed burn. Pitch pine has cones that stay closed unless there is a heat of a fire, or if you do a thinning and you get a lot of sunlight on the forest floor, the heat bounces back and it opens up the cones. So that's adapted to fire. The Jersey pine barrens, New Jersey, Long Island pitch pine barrens, they all need fire to reproduce and to burn off the understory to make conditions right. So when the cones open up, the seeds drop and they didn't grow. So pitch pine needs fire specifically, I would say. Although we did there's another pitch pine natural area preserve in Wharton Brook State Park in Wallingford that I did a timber harvest with the purpose of opening up a lot so the pitch pine can reproduce, and it worked. We didn't have a fire. Just the fact that we cut it really heavy allowed the pitch pine cones to open up, and they dropped the seed, and then now they're doing well. Yes.
In Connecticut, do fire towers still play any role in identifying fires?
No, the last fire tower was at, I think, in Mohawk, maybe, State Forest, in the mid-'80s they closed it.
1985.
1985. And we used to have planes fly on high fire. We don't do that anymore either. I think now there's certain people out there with cell phones that if you see something, you can call in right away. Whereas before, if you were hiking and you saw a fire, it might be a couple hours before you get back to your car to call somebody. So I think the response is a lot better with cell phones.
Could there be some talk on constantly flying drones in the area now that we have that ability? Maybe we should look into that.
Well, we actually still have planes that we can do detection with. But, like Jerry said, there's so many folks with cell phones and people around that they get picked up. That's why the fire towers went away. And even the detection flights, very rare. It'd have to be, if we get into a real high fire danger situation, yeah, we'd probably do detection flights again. But we just haven't had that weather for several years.
There would be a possibility. We had a fire in Cornwall a couple of years ago that was several hundred acres. It was really hard to get to. And I could see where a drone with some kind of heat sensing camera on it would have been helpful because it was too far to keep going in and checking all the time. But if you had a drone, that might have been a way to use it.
And some of the fire departments do have drones. So, the technology's there. The state just doesn't, we don't own the drones. The state police do, the state forestry do. So it's out there, we can use it if we, need.
Well, I meant for preventative purposes, not to say, oh yeah, it's hot over here. But to just peruse the area, maybe one an hour, one every 2 hours to pick up a potential whatever. And just something to think about.
Yep.
I read an article that said that the number of ticks was, in the old days, the Indians kept burning the forest and there was less ticks than there are now. That the ticks might be increasing because there's less fires in the woods. I don't know, does that make sense to you?
Possible. We have a lot more deer today, too, than we ever used to have, which probably
But every year they
spreads
would burn, like you said, they burn for agriculture.
Possible. I know in the summertime, when it's hot and dry, you don't see as many ticks as when it's moister. So it could be. We have a lot more Japanese barberry now, and in the southern part of the state, it's just like thickets, and they harbor ticks because it's moist, and they like the conditions there. So if you want to get rid of ticks, one recommendation is to kill the Japanese barberry. fewer, and the mice carry the tick also, so the mice like to hide under the barb areas, gets nice and protected. Yep.
The out west fire, Paradise and campfires, are we vulnerable to that kind of out of control situation here in New England, or?
Depends where your house is.
Yep. You know, take a look around where some of the houses are, okay? To answer your question to start off with, yes, we are vulnerable. We have the fuels to do that. The real reason we don't is because of the weather. Okay, think about some of the prolonged, you know, I've gone, you know, 6 months in the west and in southwest Colorado without any moisture, or minimal moisture, so prolonged drought. And it's just the way, it's high desert where I lived, high elevation desert. So it's the nature of the land. Here, we have such an ocean influence in the Northeast. You know, we're kind of on the end of everything that comes across the country, you know, from west to east. We're on the receiving end of that. So we get a lot of, you know, it grabs that moisture as it comes across from the Gulf of Mexico, or, you know, as it comes out to the ocean. A lot of moisture. But when we do have prolonged droughts, I say, you know,
2016 was a dry year.
yep. Instead, we had several months with minimal moisture, and that's when the Flat Rocks fire burned in Cornwall, and that's the fire Jerry was talking about. That was totally on state land, and it burned just under 400 acres, and it burned for 2.5 months. So that's unheard of. You guys probably never even heard of that fire when it was going on, right? Other than, what do you think the problem that, yeah, it burned on, there was nothing that it was hurting, but what do you think the problem really was? The smoke. And smoke affects everybody with respiratory issues, and that really was the primary problem. Where it was in a bad spot. We had a lot of dead hemlock trees. Well, they're still there. Some of them burned up. It was a hazard to put firefighters in there from the prolonged drought between the woolly adelgid that affected the hemlock stand. So there was a lot of factors that come into play with that fire. So it was decided to manage that fire rather than go full suppression and put it out. So,
but I've been on fires where you're in people's backyards, and they've got a propane tank there, and it's you got to be careful. I mean, Southington Mountain burns fairly often, and it comes right up to people's backyards, and you're going through people's yards to get. We had a fire in New Milford 2 years ago, summertime, and it started along Lake Winona. The boaters were camping. They have a campfire. The fire burns up the steep hill, and there was a subdivision up there, and there wasn't much between the backyards of the houses and the fire. I mean, we had to go through people's side yards to get to the fire. It's possible.
So I'd like to kind of wind down. You know, if you have any specific questions, Tim and Jerry will be here for those, and you can ask them then. But I'd like to thank all of you for coming, and I'd like to especially thank you two. And just again remind you that there's like coffee and things available out there, a few bites to eat if you'd like. There is a donation can if you feel like making a donation at the table there. And again, thanks very much. Hopefully we'll see you in June for our next round of stuff.